We have our natural gas energy panel. While they're taking a seat, I will introduce the panelists. We have with us today Nick Del Oso, the President and CEO of Expand Energy Corporation, Chad Zamarin, the Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategic Development at Williams Companies, and Carl Brensike, co-founder and managing partner of Haymaker Minerals and Royalties. The moderator of this session is Max Gordon, correspondent at Fox Business.
Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, we have a mic on? All right, thank you, everybody, for being here and for having us. It's good to be actually talking to some people. Normally, I'm talking into a camera, so this is going to be a little bit of a change up for me today. We're just going to start out with having everybody introduce themselves, so we'll just go on down the line.
All right, great. Chad Zamarin with Williams. Williams is one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in the United States. A company was founded in 1908, so over a century ago. Actually, at that time, our primary construction equipment was a horse, and we were building water infrastructure, sidewalks, and roads in the United States. And so when we think about energy transition, I think we've kind of been going through an energy transition. We're always going through a transition of some sort. We weren't doing in 1908 what we're doing now here in 2024. And so I've been with Williams for 7 years. Prior to that, I was with Cheniere Energy, the company that started the earliest exports of liquefied natural gas from the United States.
Great. Nick Del Oso, CEO of Expand Energy. Expand is a new brand. We rebranded the company 2 weeks ago. We closed a merger between Chesapeake Energy and Southwestern. I came from the Chesapeake side, where I've been for 16 years. Served most of that time as CFO, and I've been in the CEO role for about 3 years. We are the largest natural gas producer in the United States. We operate production of about 10 BCF a day, and we have net to our account about just under 7 BCF a day today. Just to put that into context, the United States produces about 100 BCF a day, so we're responsible for 10% of the gas produced in the United States each day. Our assets are in the Marcellus Shale, 2 areas of the Marcellus Shale, Northeast Pennsylvania, which is in close proximity to major metropolitan areas on the East Coast, 100 miles from New York City, 250 miles from DC, 200 miles from Boston. I'm sure when you guys talk about power markets in Q&A, we'll end up talking about that proximity of that asset. We have a lot of production in West Virginia, a little bit in Ohio, and then another very large production base in the Shreveport area of Louisiana, which is well positioned to service LNG export facilities along the Gulf Coast. So we're very excited about the combination of the company that we've created, quite a bit of cost rationalization opportunities to bring better drilling technologies, better efficiencies through scale, and effectiveness of operating a larger business through the drill bit, lower costs, and ultimately deliver more energy where and when it's needed, hence the rebrand of Expand Energy.
Hey, Carl Brensike. It's good to be back on campus. Also a proud Trojan, sharing Case's frustration with the football team. I actually host the Houston USC Alumni Association Christmas party at my house, and we just replay the Orange Bowl from 2004 because I think that's the last time I was truly happy. We've been in the mineral and royalty space. As Todd mentioned on the last panel, the United States is very unique in its ability for citizens and corporations to actually own the underlying rights to the hydrocarbons in the ground. Whenever I would raise money from foreign countries, it took them about 20 minutes to realize, wait, the state doesn't own everything, and you have to go through them. So I've been involved in that space for about 20 different years. I've owned oil and gas assets in 26 different states and 35,000 wells. So really broad range of experience with the regulations in all of the different states. Also been pretty active with the IPAA over the years, been on the board for a while. And if I could, I always like to ask this one question, just to get a sense for the room. So we're on the natural gas panel here, and really the shale revolution started in about 2004 with natural gas. It went into oil. If I can get a show of hands, I want to see, with all this we've doubled the natural gas production since then. We've more than doubled the oil production since then in the country. Show of hands, who thinks over that amount of time the United States has increased their CO2 emissions, decreased their CO2 emissions, or kind of kept them even? So show of hands, who thinks our CO2 emissions have gone up? Who thinks they've been pretty flat? And who thinks they've decreased? Yeah, I mean, we've decreased them by over 13%. And the biggest driver of that is natural gas conversion from coal to natural gas. And I think it's a story that people don't understand, but this shale revolution has done more. And we've done more than any other country in the world in lowering our emissions. And we didn't even sign the Paris Accord, and we did more than any other country in the world in lowering our emissions, and it's because of natural gas.
Love that comment, Carl, and I know we're just trying to do introductions, so I'm cheating a little bit.
You're going to lose us, Tom.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
We're already running over.
This is how we do it.
it's going to be rough. But it is an interesting and fascinating evolution of how emissions have worked in the United States. And to build a little bit on one of the questions that was asked in the prior panel, Carl talked about how it's the conversion from coal to natural gas, but it's also the responsibility that our industry has taken on here. The emissions profile reduction through production that we have seen as an industry on our own, which largely has come from being asked to pay attention to it. This was not something that in the 80s and 90s, most of us weren't involved in the industry in the 80s, or at least in the early 90s, but the industry at the time wasn't focused on this issue. When the industry became focused on this issue, it became obvious that it was good business to take care of our emissions profile, and we've done that, and we've done a good job of it. And the further point that was made on the last panel, that our stakeholders hold us accountable to something as larger companies that is much more stringent than regulation ever does. And so your larger companies are driving the performance that leads to this in a way that is really not well understood outside of the industry.
And Max, just to grab it again, just to give a few facts, because I do think it's really important to talk facts. There's a lot of narratives out there, but we grew natural gas production in the United States from about 60 BCF a day to what Nick said, to 100 BCF a day. And during that period of time, the U.S. led the world, as Carl said, in reducing emissions here in the United States. And natural gas contributed to 60% of the emissions reductions that the U.S. achieved. So it is a proven fact that over the last 15 years, natural gas has been the most powerful decarbonization tool that we have. Now you couple that with investments in next generation technologies and renewables that we'll also talk about don't work without the balancing of natural gas to maintain reliability. That's when you start to think about how you solve complex energy problems, it is not an either-or equation. It is how do we bring the tools that we have that are proven, and then how do we take them to a global scale? Because you heard earlier, the world will burn more coal this year than any year in the history of the planet. China will burn 10 times the amount of coal that we do here in the United States. India, now the most populous country on the planet. It's been the first time in centuries China hasn't been the most populous. India is just getting started. Someone mentioned earlier, your average home refrigerator uses more energy than the average person in India has access to. Like, they are just getting started on their journey out of poverty and towards, having reliable and clean energy. So we've got to take the tools that we know we have at scale, and we've got to be part of solving those challenges. And that's why we're so focused on this solution.
Well, let's break into it then, and let's talk about natural gas as a transition fuel. Given that natural gas was recognized as a transition fuel at COP28, how do you reconcile this designation with the increasing scrutiny and opposition to LNG projects? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's an education challenge. One thing I will point out, 15 years ago, just over 15 years ago, we were declining in our domestic energy production. Frankly, we thought we were running out of natural gas. We were building import terminals to import natural gas from places like the Middle East and from Russia. That's where we were headed from an energy dependence perspective. We were importing oil from the Middle East, from Venezuela, from places that weren't, necessarily our friends and didn't have our best interests in mind. Just over 7 years ago, we had no LNG exports. And now you look at where we sit today, we are the world's #1 producer in oil and natural gas. In just over 7 years, we become the world's leading exporter of natural gas. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States doubled LNG imports into Europe. Imagine what would the world have looked like had we not been in a position to deliver double the amount of energy to our friends and allies in Europe when Russia turned off the gas and tried to hold a continent hostage. That's what you have when you have energy independence. You have the ability to not be beholden to someone who doesn't have your best interests in mind. And so we've got to make sure that we educate ourselves. We've got to be proud of what we've done and accomplished as a country, not apologize for it. We've got to preserve the advantages that we have, and we've got to talk about the facts of using natural gas coupled with the next generation of technologies. One thing, and then I'll pass it on. Last year, over 70% of the clean energy investments that were made in the world were made by companies that have hydrocarbon operations. Like, the energy companies of today are going to, in large part, be the energy companies of the future. They won't all make it. We're not all going to figure out how to keep transitioning and evolving, but we've got to make sure that we're educating folks on the fact that natural gas and LNG is super critical to solving the global emissions challenge.
Yeah, the discussion of natural gas as a transition or bridge fuel is something that gets brought up from time to time. It gets brought up, frankly, less today than it did a few years ago. But to me, it's a transition or a bridge that has a very, very long time frame. And, I don't really know how it ever ends. And to Chad's point that he started off with around energy transition, we've been in a constant state of energy transition since we were using, whale blubber to burn for lighting. And we've continued to evolve how we access energy over time. And we're going to continue to evolve. But the fact is the world is short energy, massively short energy. And we're short energy in places around the world that we've already talked about, like India, which is growing its demand pretty rapidly and giving people more access to energy every day, but is woefully behind many of its economic peers. But we're also short energy in pockets of the United States. And that's policy driven, and it's structural in the way that our infrastructure works. But there's no reason why. I was looking at a chart yesterday with someone, the cost of electricity here in California is 3 times the national average. I mean, why? Simply because of policy and access. We are abundant resources in the United States, and we're abundant resources here in California, and we can offer the cost of energy for significantly less than is imputed on it today with the regulatory or the policy overlays that we have. And it impacts people's quality of life so very much. Better access to energy means better access to all of the things that matter in your life and the lower cost for all of those things. Healthcare, education, all rely on quality and low-cost access to energy. And we are big believers that energy should come in as low of a carbon footprint as possible. And we just think that in order to meet all of the demand, you need to find the right balance. And it's not zero carbon. It's something that's quite low and something that can be driven lower through technology over time. But it'll include natural gas for several more generations, if not forever.
Carl?
Yeah, I mean, LNG and exports and just all of the energy that we have here in the United States is critical towards reducing these emissions and increasing the climate. And I think a lot of the time people fail to realize there's a couple different energy transitions going on right now. One of the most important ones to a lot of the world is the transition from having no energy to having energy. And there's 700 million people in the world with no electricity. And we mentioned there's 2 million people that don't have clean cooking fuels, and they're burning wood and they're burning dung, and it kills 3 million people a year from the pollution in their homes. And meanwhile, we're in the United States and we have these incredible resources, and we hamstring ourselves. I mean, to me, when I tell this to people in other countries, it's just like, how stupid are we that we've got the biggest user of energy is the Northeast in New York and Boston. And the biggest supply of energy is, 4,000-mile pipeline away in Pennsylvania, in the Marcellus Shale. And we've built hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline in this country. 4,000 more would connect the biggest user to the cleanest source of energy that they could get, and they won't do it.
Sorry, it's 250 miles from
250.
from
Sorry.
Pennsylvania to
Four,
Boston.
yeah. Okay. Well, maybe
Not to-
4,000 all around.
If you go around the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can go around.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
250 miles, like literally that's the distance. But instead, Boston, they will tank oil from Venezuela all the way around and they'll burn it for energy. And it's like, not only is that 10 times worse for the environment than it would be just pulling it out of the Marcellus, but that also robs energy that Venezuela could be sending somewhere else where they need it. And the United States not producing their resources in the cleanest, most efficient way and getting them out to the rest of the world so they can begin their transition is a huge failure of policy in the United States.
One of the policy things that shows up a lot of times is when, for example, a few years ago, there was a call for Venezuela to produce more oil as we were trying to restrict production out of the U.S. And this was derided pretty openly. But just to think about that for a second, I mean, the environmental controls in Venezuela are, essentially non-existent compared to what we put controls around in the United States. We're very careful about all of our industrial activity in the United States, in particular oil and gas activity. And so to think that by reducing production in the United States, but allowing production to increase in a jurisdiction that doesn't have environmental controls to the same degree is helpful to the environment is crazy. Our environmental concerns don't have borders, right? When air moves and we share the environment with everyone in the world. So it is not a function of one country versus another, and it gets treated that way often because we brag about, and we already have on this panel, about how the United States emissions have come down materially. And it's great. We should be proud of that. And we should use that as an example for how we can make that happen in other jurisdictions. But it doesn't actually matter if one country improves its air quality only to have it, replaced in the jet stream by another country that's worsening theirs.
Well, while we're on this environmental kick, let me just ask you this question. What measures is the industry taking to prevent and mitigate methane leaks throughout the natural gas supply chain?
I'll start with that. As the largest natural gas producer in the United States, we're extremely proud of the fact that we have a methane intensity rate, which is a measure of how much methane leaks out of our production relative to our total production, of 0.02%. And in reality, it's probably a little bit less than that. COP 20, it may have been 8, I don't know, I can't remember which number, came out with a target of energy production around the world should try to be at 0.2% methane intensity. I thought that was a win. We're at 0.02 in our company as the largest natural gas producer in the United States. So we don't emit very much methane. It's our revenue stream. It would be complete. It's every 0.02% that we do emit, we view as a loss that we're trying very hard to capture every day. We've gone through a number of different iterations of equipment upgrades in the field. Just recently, we went through and replaced a bunch of valves that actuated using the flow of natural gas through the pipe. And so there was a tiny bit of methane that emitted every time that valve actuated. And we've retrofitted all those valves to prevent that from happening. Pretty quick fix, pretty low dollar fix. Given how small of a methane emission profile we have, little tiny things like that really do help. But that's the level that we're focused on today. Our industry is very, very careful about that.
Yeah, and we operate across the entire United States. We operate in pretty much every supply basin in the U.S. We operate gathering systems, processing facilities. We move natural gas through complex networks across the entire country. And what's really interesting, and Nick touched on this, if we didn't have any of that and we asked our engineers today to design the natural gas value chain, they would actually design it without methane emissions. And I will say that we are owning the fact that we have to address methane emissions so we can focus on the benefits of the use of natural gas. But the primary source of methane emissions through our value chain was actually designed as part of the infrastructure. We just didn't know methane was a problem. Nick mentioned pneumatic devices that actually use methane to drive the equipment, and every time it operates, it emits to atmosphere. We evacuate our pipelines to atmosphere to maintain those. There are government regulations that actually require us to vent our methane to atmosphere and perform maintenance. Our facilities have relief valves so that if overpressure happens on our systems. They automatically vent to atmosphere. Literally, systems that were built over the last 200 years were designed to allow methane emissions. So we understand where the emissions are, and the lowest cost, most impactful carbon reduction, methane reduction initiatives that we can do is decarbonizing the existing value chain. It is by far, it's great we have to invest in technologies, but when you start talking about $85 a ton for CCUS or $300 a ton for renewable natural gas or $600 a ton for direct air capture, for literally dollars per ton, you can reduce CO2 equivalent emissions by investing in decarbonizing the existing infrastructure. And that's the largest, source of energy that we have. And so we're focused on, my kids are starting to finally think I'm cool. Like, we actually invested in a satellite technology company. We've launched, I'm not.
They don't think you're that cool.
Thanks, buddy. We've launched satellites on SpaceX rockets. We have sensor technology we're investing in. We have artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. What I've challenged our team with is traditionally natural gas was sourced across the country based on geography and price. We connect users of natural gas to producers based on where it's located and how much it costs to get it where it's needed. Going forward, it's going to be sourced based on geography, price, and the emissions profile of the energy that you're producing. We have to connect the demand to the cleanest molecule possible and make sure that we can move it through a decarbonized value chain. And think of it like, the interstate highway system. We need to move the energy through that infrastructure in a way that is continually decarbonized. And so I would say that, Nick talked about upstream production, the midstream industry, like, this is our mission. We are going to take methane emissions out of the equation, and then we're going to focus on how we use natural gas, further decarbonize the use of natural gas, but also couple it with technologies to be, again, what I think will be one of the most powerful decarbonization tools that we have.
I just add for the young people in here, part of these questions is what makes the energy industry so fascinating, whether you're drilling a well or you're a petroleum engineer or a mechanical engineer, but all the technologies that are used to target and find methane, from the satellites that are finding it, from the devices and the drone technology, and figuring out constantly new ways to address these problems. This is an industry of problem solvers, as we've talked about, and this was, as we said, it was a problem we didn't really know that we had to solve 15 years ago, and now we know we have to solve it. And there's so much opportunity within this industry to solve a lot of problems as we continue to power the world.
One of the fun things about how we solve those problems too, though, is that they're almost always commercially driven. Think about what Chad was talking about a minute ago with how they manage the evacuation of methane from their pipes for different maintenance events. We are Williams' largest customer, and so our contracts
and
with
favorite,
Williams
and favorite,
of course, yes. Nice. Our contracts have embedded in each and every one of them an assumption called FLNU, fuel loss and unaccounted for gas. There's a fair amount of equipment that's used to move natural gas around, which is burned by, you burn natural gas to move to activate compressors to move the gas. And then there is the concept of loss and unaccounted for. Just like any other fluid system, there will be some these small amounts of leaks or more likely the evacuation for maintenance events. There's an assumed amount of that. When we hand the gas off to them until the point at which they sell it, there's an allowance for some amount. If they do better and they don't have the maintenance event that causes the evacuation, or they get more creative about how that maintenance event works, they keep the revenue from that because it's assumed that we don't get it. They need it for their operations. And so there's a commercial incentive already to find a better answer. And again, I think our industry does a really nice job of exceeding regulatory targets because we're incented to do so for lots of other reasons. And that's how our society functions best.
Yeah, one thing I would also say is, the kind of the trifecta of solving any energy challenges, you need energy to be reliable, you need it to be affordable, and you need it to be clean. And there's really today no single technology that 100% solves all three of those together. You can have 100% clean, it will not be reliable, it will not be affordable. And so that's just a fact. You look at energy systems, and that's the complex equation that we're trying to solve. The good news about natural gas is it's 4 times cheaper than electricity. So it is the most affordable tool that we have. We've also talked about the fact that it's also got great capability to support decarbonization. But with being 4 times cheaper than electricity, there's a lot of room to invest in the natural gas value chain to further decarbonize it. And it will still be the most affordable energy tool that we have today. And so when you think about your car now has a catalytic converter, or it's got a muffler, or it's got an exhaust system, like we can add technology to the existing energy ecosystem. We are not going to tear out the roads and build new roads for electric vehicles. Like we have to retrofit the existing energy. The world today will consume 600 quadrillion BTU of energy this year. Like this is and you've already heard, and that appetite is only growing. So we have to figure out how to retrofit the existing systems to create that low carbon energy solution. And so that's our industry is very focused on doing just that.
Well, we're going to keep it at a global scale right now, and we're going to pivot slightly to security concerns. Chad, you were touching on this a little bit earlier with the war in Ukraine, but how has the war in Ukraine, as well as other security concerns in the Red Sea, impacted the natural gas and LNG market?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a great example of why it's so important for us to protect our energy independence. I mentioned that we're the #1 producer of oil and gas. It was mentioned earlier, we are not a top 10 producer of lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper. This is today our energy security blanket for us and for our friends around the world. And so I do think it's a really important reminder of how important it is never to take that for granted. We're here in California. California is dependent upon other countries and other states for its energy. Like that should not be the policy. You should figure, and California is blessed with incredible natural resources. So we've got to figure out as a country to be honest about kind of the complexities of the energy equation, and we've got to be focused on protecting what we have, doing it better and cleaner than anyone else, but certainly the conflicts around the world. I mean, you're talking about big, kind of scary times, and we've lived in a very blessed period of relative calm around the world, and we can't forget how important it is for American ingenuity, American energy security to be that leader around the world and be prepared. God forbid when it ever happens, but be prepared to help out our friends and our own interests when needed.
Nick?
Yeah, I think it's ironic we started off this conversation today talking a lot more about environmental issues than we did about security, because the biggest fallout from the Ukraine war is that security became the #1 issue when people talk about energy, and it forcibly displaced environmental concerns. And I think about Pakistan as a case study for this, which is really, really easy to understand. LNG cargoes are set up under contract to be delivered to all sorts of different places around the world on a daily basis. And underneath those contracts, you have the ability as the deliverer of that cargo to not meet your delivery. And if you do so, you pay some penalty, some liquidated damages. Well, the countries or the traders that were responsible for a lot of the cargoes on the water at the height of high prices during the Ukraine war, and the very, very high prices that were being drawn into Europe, redirected cargoes to Europe, and countries elsewhere that needed the gas were having to compete with prices in Europe to still receive their cargoes. And Pakistan said, this is crazy. We are not a wealthy country, and we are not going to pay giant amounts of money to compete with Germany for natural gas when we can just go get coal. And so that's absolutely what we're going to do. And your environmental concerns that you're worried about are all well and good, and y'all take care of that yourselves. We are not going to burden our citizens with the cost of an environmental challenge that is going to prevent us from being able to provide what relatively small amount of energy we provide to our citizens already. And who in the world could blame them for making that decision? So it's the right answer that when you have this big supply reduction in the system, that people are going to go and use whatever they can to meet the needs around them. And energy, gets talked about in your economics classes as being inelastic, and that was a really great example of what inelasticity looks like. And we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize that abundance of supply gives you better options about how to optimize the energy system around affordability, reliability, and lowest carbon.
Yeah, and just to add just a number that I think is helpful to put this in context what Nick's describing. Europe on an average year spends around $200 billion on energy. In 2022, Europe spent $1 trillion on energy because they lost cheap Russian gas that they had become dependent upon, and they didn't have a low-cost alternative that they were producing themselves. And it's interesting, if you travel to Europe and you heard some talk about the IRA, that's almost like 2.5 IRAs that they could have invested in Europe in next generation technologies. But that money's gone, right? And the deficits and the damage that's caused is significant. And you've got manufacturing that's shutting down in Europe, and it's not going away. Those emissions are not going away. That manufacturing in some parts is coming back to the United States because we have low cost energy. But in a lot of other cases, it's going to places like China and India where they have much higher emissions in powering their industries. And so I think it's really highlighted kind of the importance for us to really stay focused on our leadership in this space.
Carl?
Yeah, and I think this is where people talk about energy security as if the United States just needs the energy. I think where we're kind of failing, and I think it was a problem also with the Paris Accord, is there was this thought that every country individually had to do what they could to reduce their emissions. And that's like, imagine you live in a neighborhood and everybody's driving like old beater cars, just polluting out of everywhere. And you happen to be a mechanic and you know how to do a little thing to fix your car. And you're like, okay, I did my part, but the whole rest of the neighborhood's still polluting because you didn't go help them out. You haven't really done what you can do. And if the United States, and California is guilty of this too, they have all of these amazing resources that they can develop cost effectively, environmentally friendly, and get out to the rest of the world. But instead they go, well, we're gonna do our part and we're gonna stop producing fossil fuels. And they're just making the world dirtier. I mean, we're not getting these clean burning energies out to the people who need them, and they're forced to use alternatives. Talking with Sanjeev at dinner last night, like India, they're gonna turn the lights on. Africa's gonna turn the lights on, and if they need coal, they're gonna use coal. They're gonna burn whatever they need to burn. They're not gonna go, this lucky 1/8, a lucky billion. We're in a privileged position to go, we have everything we could ever want. Now let's try and save the world, but we're not doing it in the right way. We should be producing all of the energy that we possibly can as cleanly and efficiently as we can and getting it to areas of the world who don't have our resources. And we're not doing it. Our policies aren't allowing us to do it, and we're missing an opportunity to complete both transitions, both the people transitioning to getting the lights on and doing it in a cleaner way than we ever have before.
Let's hone in a little bit more domestically and talk about how the policies set forth by the Biden administration has impacted the natural gas and LNG industry. Chad?
Yeah, I'll start. There's an unfortunate pause on LNG permits. I think that was bad policy. Frankly, I think the administration recognizes that was bad policy and politics at the time, and I expect that that'll get resolved. But in the meantime, it calls into question the reliability of the United States as a trade partner for energy, and so I think it's a really unfortunate move that was made, and it needs to be corrected, as quickly as possible. We're in an election year, and we all know, things are crazy during an election year. So hopefully we get through that and that gets resolved. But that was really bad policy. I'd say beyond that, I was talking to Gordon, one of the USC professors, and it's really interesting. The Biden administration we've done a poor job as an industry, I think, telling our story. And we never really had to. This wasn't a hyper-political topic up until just the last few years. And so I think we're still learning on how to engage. But, when the Biden administration came in, we weren't really, I think, talking to and educating folks. I'd say we've seen a good progression in an understanding of our industry. We don't consider ourselves a political industry. We are here to solve the energy challenges of the country and frankly of the world, and do that in the most responsible way. And so that's our challenge. That hopefully is not a political, agenda. But I will say we've got to do a better job of educating folks on the complexity of these issues. And I will mention just two items. You heard it talk about permitting reform earlier. And for us, we're an energy infrastructure company. Natural gas demand has grown by about 50% over the last 10 years. Pipeline capacity, which is what we use to deliver it across the country, has only grown by 25%. Storage capacity, which is what we use to balance the grid and the reliability, has not grown at all. So we have added more cars to the highways and we haven't expanded the roads. And when that happens, you create more congestion, accidents happen, volatility occurs, reliability goes down. And so that's the challenge that we have to solve. And that should be a challenge that any administration gets focused on. There's two primary issues that we're focused on. One is making sure that the federal government can authorize a project. And once the federal government determines that's what's best for the country, that we get back to building and we don't get caught in years of permitting red tape and litigation. And that's what happens today. And it is slowing down our ability to keep pace. And so, that's a key kind of factor for us. And then the other one is getting our message out, making sure that people understand this is not just an issue for pipelines and natural gas. People are resisting solar farms. People are resisting transmission lines. Like if we want to achieve our goals, we've got to get back to building as a country. This is a country that built the Hoover Dam. We built the interstate highway system. We built the most incredible energy infrastructure on the planet. But it has gotten really hard to build. So we've got to do a lot of work. But in general, I'd say the Biden administration, whatever the next administration is, we just got to do the work and make sure people understand the challenge.
Nick?
I don't have a whole lot to add to that other than just a little bit of context around the need for infrastructure, because the LNG pause is connected to infrastructure generally. It is so difficult to build infrastructure in this country today, and it's so sorely needed to continue to provide adequate supplies of energy all the places it's needed. We are really long natural gas resource in this country. We have a tremendous amount of natural gas in the ground. Like, frankly, so much that it's sort of scary to think about if we brought enough of it to the surface all at the same time, what it would do to price. I mean, it could be, we'll talk about prices in a minute, but we can oversupply the market very, very easily because we don't have the storage to buffer. That said, we are not long resource that can be brought to market at a reasonable price because we're limited on infrastructure. The Marcellus Shale in Northeast Pennsylvania, where our largest operating area is, we have decades of resource that we could be drilling faster, delivering more volume to market if there were more pipes. And we would be displacing other gas that's probably higher cost. And we could really continue to keep the economy humming on much lower cost energy if we had better access to infrastructure. All new infrastructure that's built is significantly cleaner, to the point Chad made earlier about how the industry has evolved. And so, you're really, every time you add new infrastructure, you're adding much cleaner marginal molecules to the economy. So that lack of infrastructure, which is not just a Biden administration thing, this has been growing as a problem for quite a while now, and it's really manifesting itself into some severe challenges, is something that is extremely complicated to resolve because it involves legislative issues, and it involves regulatory bodies like EPA and DOE, and it obviously involves the judicial branch. You need to be able to work through the court systems efficiently, and I'm a believer that people should be able to challenge what they want to challenge in the court systems, but not frivolously. So it's a very complicated problem to solve, but one that needs to be solved very badly.
Carl?
Yeah, I like echoing kind of what Chad said. We try to be a non-political industry solving problems. The problem is when the politicians try and politicize it and they go, well, we want the environmental vote, so we're going to say we're going to ban fracking, and now, oh, wow, we really need some swing states and coal country, so now we're not going to ban fracking and natural gas in those areas. So again, to me, it's just like taking it out of the political spectrum, and this is a global problem that I think we are capable of leading and charging and solving to a large extent. But also, as we've said, like, we haven't done a great job educating people, especially young people. And I talk to a lot of young people about energy, and one of the first questions I ask, I go, hey, do you know the difference between oil and natural gas? And the majority answer is, well, yeah, you take oil and you make gas with it. And I'm like, gasoline? So your average person doesn't know what natural gas is, and they don't understand like how their house is powered and where electricity comes from. And you talk to them, well, I want to drive a Tesla because it doesn't use any fossil fuels. And it's like, okay, and you pull up the grid here in 90007, and 50% of the power for all the Teslas in Los Angeles, I think 46% is natural gas, the other 3% is coal, and 1% is oil. So half of the power for these vehicles are coming from clean burning natural gas, and understanding, as John said, which I love the line, we're not trying to solve a fossil fuel problem, we're trying to solve an emission problem. And people go, well, I don't like oil and gas because there's drilling. And it's like, well, how do you feel about mining? Well, what do you mean? It's like, well, you got to mine for the same things to build the alternatives. It's all interconnected, and every one of these energies, we have to decarbonize it to the extent that we can, and it's a goal for everybody in the room and all the different technologies. But I don't know if there's one better than the other. We've just got to work at it all together.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I mentioned how blessed we are with what we've created here in the U.S. The natural gas value chain in the United States is kind of the holy grail of what we're trying to achieve in energy systems. We produce natural gas literally hundreds, even thousands of miles away from where it's consumed. We move it over vast distances without losing any of it. Not even like power lines where due to efficiency, you lose energy as you move it. We can store it. Today we're storing 3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas below ground. That's 30 days of storage that we have here in the United States, so that when it gets cold, we can turn on more energy. When the wind slows down, when the sun sets, we can turn on more energy. Like, that is the holy grail equation. Now we've got to figure out how to take that equation that we've created and take that to the next generation of technologies. But that's why what we do, I'm so convinced, is such an important blueprint for how you build an energy system of the future. We've got work to do to decarbonize the existing system, but we've got to leverage the natural gas value chain as the example for how we create a big, at scale, complex, but effective energy system that solves that really difficult equation that we're constantly trying to solve. And that's why, we've said it before, like the young talent, the kids that are in college. I mean, my son, my wife says it's a midlife crisis, but I just had my first go to college, and I got my first at-home blood pressure monitor. So this past year was kind of a big year, and so I'm starting to get really, focused on kind of, life's purpose and my midlife crisis, and I'm very encouraged and hopeful that we can get back to, attracting talent to this industry, because we're not just talking about investing in what we do today or what we've done in the past. Let's figure out how to take what we've accomplished and then take it to the next level and be the solution provider for the future.
Now, I know that we're trying to avoid politics and all your companies are non-political, but we're just going to dip our toes just a little bit into it. I know. So as we approach
politics the whole time.
I know. So as we approach the 2024 U.S. elections, how do you anticipate political outcomes impacting your company's operations, policy landscapes, and strategic priorities?
Yeah, mine will be quick. I actually think it won't. I don't think this is a political election outcome issue. We're a big industry, and I think the bigger issue is going to be, as Nick mentioned, as I mentioned, the lack of pace keeping up of infrastructure. We're seeing record volatility in energy across natural gas, but also electricity. That's an infrastructure issue where we haven't kept pace with infrastructure. We're seeing record price spikes, and utility bills are going up rapidly. We're seeing reliability problems when we have winter storms, not just in California, New York. We're seeing it in parts of our footprint we'd never seen it before. So I think more importantly is, are we going to figure it out on the front end and solve the problem, or are we going to figure it out the hard way? And I think that's what we're trying to get ahead of and make sure as a country, all the goals that we have, all of the, now you layer on AI and data centers and the demand coming from that. Can we achieve what we want to achieve without the system kind of breaking around us? I think that's going to be the bigger issue. And I frankly, I don't think that the election is going to have a big impact on that fundamental issue that we're going to have to solve.
Nick?
Totally agree. The momentum of policy is very hard to change. And so I don't care who wins. I don't think a whole lot changes. I don't think if Trump wins, you see a lot of regulatory stuff get clawed back, and I don't think if Harris wins, you see a lot more show up that's going to be immediate. Over time, it can change, but I'm not worried about exactly what happens 3 weeks from today, right?
Yeah.
To being an immediate catalyst.
Carl?
I predict that whoever wins the election will blame our industry for 100% of the problems we don't solve, and will take 100% of the credit for any of the problems we do solve. If history's
As any
any
good
precedent.
politician would.
Buyer of that prediction.
Good jaded answer. All right, well, let's
So it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters.
well, let's move back into your wheelhouses and let's talk about markets a little bit. The U.S. natural gas market's experiencing a glut. We alluded to this earlier with record high production levels and near all-time low prices. Now, in response, major producers have reduced output and delayed drilling projects. What's been the impact on your company?
I'll let you.
We're sending a lot less gas through Chad's pipeline.
That is true.
They're
We've
paying less
continued.
royalties to me as well.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, so they're both mad at us. We've continued to drill and complete wells throughout the year, which means we're trying to maintain our productive capacity, but we're not turning those wells online, which is a very different strategy than we've seen people employ in the past. What that means is that we're continuing to invest money and we're not getting any revenue from that investment. So you can think of it like a retail store building up their warehouse, 2 years in advance for 2 years from now, Christmas. There's real risk in doing it. We need higher prices to justify the investment that we're making today. And we're expecting that to happen. So we are taking steps to address the supply-demand imbalance that is long supply today, but we've done so in a way that recognizes that the cycles that we face in our industry are very severe and they're becoming shorter. And so for us to be able to appropriately respond when this cycle whipsaws back in the other direction, and we believe it will, and we believe it will likely during 2025, we will be ready with excess production to bring to market to respond, and therefore we can try to prevent too much of a price spike. People ask me all the time, wouldn't it be great if gas went to $8? It would actually be terrible for our business in the long run. It'd be great for about a quarter or two, but that's a very short-sighted view, because ultimately that's when you do have policies that respond in an illogical manner, and we believe you got to have a very affordable answer for consumers, or consumers are savvy and they will find alternatives, even if those alternatives are ultimately not great, like switching to coal if you're Pakistan. So we don't want to see prices spike too much, and we try to take steps to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I think Nick said it really well, and we think the same. I mean, we believe in the market should be priced at a level where producers can make a modest and reasonable return, where we can do the same, but we don't price ourselves out from a demand destruction perspective. And right now, natural gas is by far the most affordable, energy resource, as we've discussed. And so, I do think, and I'll go back to just maybe a little bit of the basics. The natural gas market, as Nick says, about 100 BCF a day in the United States. 4 primary sectors in the market: the residential and commercial, heating, home heating, businesses, kind of the base of what started really the ramp of our industry. You've got the industrial complex. You mentioned where oil and natural gas are different. Natural gas also produces a lot of the liquids that we use to create plastics and materials that are super critical to, really almost everything that we do. And then, you look at power generation, which has grown significantly over the last 15 years for natural gas. And then finally, LNG exports. Today, we're exporting about 14 BCF a day of the 100 BCF a day. Over the next 5 to 10 years, just with what's under construction right now, we will double LNG exports. So more demand is coming. We are continuing to set records on peak power demand every year, year over year. And now we layer on the race for artificial intelligence, for data centers, for these large language models. And that is a race, frankly, we do not want to lose. There were some supply chain discussions earlier. Saudi Arabia has been buying up every gas turbine they can buy because they want to be the Saudi Arabia of data centers. Like China is investing aggressively in trying to build infrastructure to be the world's provider of artificial intelligence and data centers. Like, this is the race that we want to win. And if we can't build the infrastructure to bring the resource, that we can produce here in the United States to these opportunities, then we're not going to win. I'm confident, I'm hopeful that we will, but I do think we're going through this period of oversupply, but we are staring at massive opportunity. And in our world, the only thing holding us back from achieving it is getting the abundant supply that we know we can produce and that Nick and Expand and the other producers can produce, getting it to the use that we need to really, achieve our full potential.
Yeah, there's a saying in the oil and gas industry, high prices cure high prices, because when it gets too expensive, people stop using it, and the same thing, low prices cure low prices, because when prices are really low, people start using a lot more energy, and I think what we'll probably see as a result of these lower for longer kind of natural gas prices, as Chad mentioned, is people building these data centers and people willing to take on much more power-intensive projects because the economics are extremely enticing with these low prices. So hopefully, we're building a whole new customer base for the product, which will alleviate that glut a little down the road. And then, as Nick said, the ability when prices go up to be able to turn the production on quick enough so we don't have an $8 spike will hopefully lead to a very healthy market in the future as people continue to use the resource.
Let's turn it over to some audience questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions for the panel, just raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone.
I'll throw one out, maybe towards Nick. How much gas do you think is shut in right now? Like, you've seen ducks growing quite a bit, especially in the Haynesville. But if you looked at the production that you could turn on today, if it was needed, any guesstimate of how much gas is behind pipe, ready to go?
Yeah, so our company alone has about a BCF a day of capacity that we could activate over a 3 to 4 month period. And we have the most that's behind pipe. So I would say beyond that, EQT has done some curtailing of just flowing production as opposed to building of ducts. And a few others have done the same, although EQT has just said that theirs is now coming back online. We're watching that pretty closely. We think it's mostly back. So I think today, I'm going to say it's between a BCF and a BCF and a half. It's a bit of a guess. I mean, it could be as high as 2, but I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think it's closer to 2 when we look behind our system. Obviously, Expand and Nick, largest and most favorite customer. So we see their curtailment, but we estimate about 2 BCF a day. So not a big difference, but that's delayed tills and some curtailment and shut in. There are ducts that are building up again. But yeah, we think it's a couple BCF a day. Now, interestingly, it's been about 50 to 70 days. If you think about the U.S. gas market, we were at about 700 BCF of excess gas and storage above the 5-year average when we came out of last winter, because we didn't have much of a winter. That's why we've had very low gas prices, because we've had too much gas in storage. And if you think about curtailing 2 BCF a day for 50 to 70 days, that's about 140 BCF of gas that didn't go to market. So it's helped. And over the last 8 months, we've gone from 700 BCF of oversupply. We're now below 200 BCF in storage above the 5-year average. Power demand has been so high this past 6 months that we have worked off that glut of supply. And if you look out and forecast, if we don't open up what's shut in, we should reach kind of 5-year average within the next, call it 4 to 6 weeks. So we're getting back to a balanced market. Now we'll see what'll happen. Winter will be very important for the natural gas market. We'll see what'll happen, but we are kind of working our way back to a more balanced market.
I want to add also, when we think about a BCF a day in our portfolio that we can bring on, like I said, over a 3 to 4 month period, that's what we refer to as initial production. And these wells obviously decline very fast. It's important to note that the rig count for natural gas in the United States is down materially over the last 12 to 18 months. So think about the Haynesville alone, because it's a really important lever of growth for natural gas in the United States. Because Marcellus and Appalachian gas is so constrained from a pipeline perspective, generally it stays pretty flat. And you could see some seasonal curtailments, but for the most part, that production stays pretty flat. The Haynesville grows when demand grows, and it shrinks when demand goes away. So right now, we've seen the Haynesville go from about 16 BCF a day at the beginning of the year down to about 14 BCF a day. If we were to bring on, and rig count went from over 70 to around 30 today. I think it's 31 this week. So if we were to bring on that BCF a day of gas, it would be split between the Haynesville and the Marcellus, and it would be a BCF for a couple months, and then pretty quickly thereafter it would be 500 million, and then it would be 400 million. And so it's not a BCF of permanent capacity. So you would get a sugar high if you brought it on all at once. We won't. We will phase it in to match market conditions. But then it would fall back down, and you're still sitting with 31 rigs in the Haynesville, which is lower than the COVID lows of rig count in the Haynesville.
Yeah, and if you look at, this is what's going to be interesting to watch. If you look at how to balance supply and demand over the next, call it 7 to 8 years, the Haynesville needs to go to 25 BCF a day. It was at 16, it's at 14. For us to meet the LNG export demand that's coming, we've got to add over 10 BCF a day of supply out of the Haynesville. And so that's the challenge of these markets, but it's also the power of the industry to respond to the demand.
So spoiler alert, we won't get to 25 BCF a day in the Haynesville. There's not enough resource for that. And this gets to the point of being very long natural gas resources in the United States, but not being long resources that are connected to pipes. So we're going to have to go find it somewhere else. And that's going to be more expensive gas than Haynesville gas, which is not great for consumers. And if we had more pipelines, we could pull in more low-cost gas. Instead, prices will go up because we don't have enough infrastructure. Go ahead.
I have a question. Sorry for being a learned LNG person, but
You got a mic coming. Sorry.
I said sorry for being an LNG person asking you this question, but do you think, you talked about how important it was for the lowering of emissions when we were able to get this LNG going. You talked a little bit about it, but not so much about how we were lowering emissions in other countries, because when we were exporting, we were reducing what they would have otherwise burnt, right? So if we could get the halt on these plants, on these LNG plants, do you think you can get pipelines built in the U.S. to fulfill that need? You just talked about how much you need to get to the plants in the next few years. But if you were able to stop the halts and get some more plants built, we could really reduce emissions across the globe.
Yeah.
Let me talk about the halt first, and then you talk about pipes. So the halt, to me, is a little bit of it is really bad policy, as Chad said. And it does send the wrong signal to our counterparties around the world about commercially what the United States represents. But in reality, from a supply-demand perspective, over the next several years, it's going to have extremely limited impact. And I think the Biden administration understood this when they put the halt in place, because they wanted to do something that would make headlines but not have a big impact. And I think that's exactly what they did. We have, as Chad said, we're going to double LNG export capacity of the United States over the next couple of years. That's going to be enough for a bit. We're going to be good for a little while. And we probably economically shouldn't have minded a pause. Now, policy is a bad way to create those outcomes, but then discuss the pipes.
No, the three big kind of gas supply basins in the United States are, the Marcellus and Utica, the Haynesville, and then the Permian, which is primarily an oil basin, but there's a lot of associated natural gas. It's interesting that over the last 5 years, we've grown production by about 8 BCF a day for natural gas. Virtually none of that has come from the Northeast, which is our cheapest, actually most efficient gas basin in the U.S. But that's an infrastructure constraint issue. But we are able to still build infrastructure in Texas and Louisiana. And there's a reason why all of the LNG capacity, or the majority of the LNG capacity, is being built along the Gulf Coast. And so I do expect that we will continue to be able to bring pipelines from the Permian to the Gulf Coast. We've got to do some debottlenecking around Houston and get Texas gas into Louisiana. We can build pipes from the Haynesville in Louisiana and East Texas down to the LNG complex. But then what's really fascinating about the United States, most places in the world for LNG production stick an LNG liquefaction train on top of an existing servicing, supply source. We actually source our gas through the network of infrastructure that we have in the United States. And Nick rightly mentioned, if we don't unlock the Northeast, we will have to rise prices a bit, and we will turn back on basins, frankly, that haven't had to contribute as much. We actually do have latent infrastructure that could allow Rockies production to make its way all the way to, that's what's incredible about our country. Like Wyoming could be, growing production to serve LNG exports through pipelines that haven't been as utilized because we've been meeting the demands with the Marcellus, the Haynesville, and the Permian. So we're pretty confident that we can achieve what's needed, but we sure would like to see our most efficient resource up in the Northeast unlocked further. That's got to come. We are not going to invest in big greenfield projects in the Northeast without public support, without policymaker support and permitting reform. It is just, no fun.
And you said, the issue is that the same forces that cause the pause in LNGs are the same ones that are causing the issues with the midstream. Chad has no shortage of desire or capital to build midstream wherever we need. Nick has no shortage of natural gas molecules to fill those pipelines. It's that we need leaders in the states and the government that are going to allow us to move these things around and get them out of the country to the extent we can, as opposed to bottle everything up and keep importing energy that we shouldn't be.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time, but let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
Thanks. Good job.